What's going on, gardeners? It's Tuesday, May 31st, and it is hot, hot, hot here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. Today's video is a video that many of you ask for every single year. It is the complete tomato tour of every single tomato variety in my garden, where I highlight what my most productive, my most disease-resistant varieties are, as well as the ones that aren't doing quite as well. Now, there's a lot to cover in this video, so I'm going to stop talking and get right into it. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon storefront and spread shop in the video description for a list of the gardening products I use and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated. I'm going to start off my tour with my indeterminate tomato varieties because they tend to be everybody's favorite overall. And I have my cherry tomatoes planted up front, and I'm starting off with the SunSugar cherry tomato, which many of you told me that I had to grow. This variety, they're all starting to turn, and I'm very excited to try it. It is crazy productive. I'm really happy with the way that the plant looks. You can see I have tomatoes turning everywhere on the entire plant. So really happy with the way that this is coming along. Again, I'm growing this because you told me that it is basically sun gold, but more crack resistant. So I can't wait to put them side by side. And speaking of side by side, that's what I have right next to it. This is my sun gold, which was my favorite cherry tomato ever. I grew it last year, and the flavor is absolutely unbeatable. So here is what that plant looks like. Incredible yields. Easily one of my most productive varieties. All these cherries are super productive. So once I get a little bit more ripening on these cherry types, I'm going to be able to do a side-by-side taste test comparison. Now over here, both of these plants are super sweet 100s, and I'm growing two plants because this was the most productive and disease-resistant plant that I have ever grown, and I was blown away by their production last year, and it looks like that there is no big change this year. As you can see, I've been eating off of these for over a week, close to 2 weeks now, and just insane production. I mean, look at it. Look at it. Off the charts tomatoes as far as the eye can see. No hint of disease, despite the fact that it's June 1st tomorrow, and usually my tomatoes have disease by now. That's why I love this super sweet 100. It is easily one of the most productive and disease resistant plants ever. Then right next to that is my black cherry, and again, I'm growing this because I wanted to grow a purple tomato, and I asked you guys what I should grow. You told me this is the best purple tomato, and right away I'm impressed by the yields. No hints of disease on the plant. The cherry tomatoes are huge. They're practically twice the size as my other cherry varieties, and because they're so big, they're taking longer to ripen. I'm getting my first few black cherries, but you can see off the charts production. These cherry tomatoes, all 5 of these plants, are easily my 5 most productive plants in the entire garden, and they have some of the best flavor too. After the cherry tomatoes, I have sauce type tomatoes that I'm growing that I have all clustered together, and these 2 plants here are called Costoluto Genovese, and I bought these. I wanted to try these varieties for the first time because of the unique shape, and they're supposed to be very productive and good sauce tomatoes. And as you can see, they have nice big clusters of fruit. The ones down here, they are starting to turn color. So probably within the next week, we'll be harvesting them. Check it out, just big clusters of fruit back there. Super productive. Starting to get a little bit of disease on the plant. This is early stages of blight, of early blight. That's to be expected here since it's almost June and it's 90 degrees and ridiculously humid, and it's been like this for a while. And these are heirloom tomatoes, so we don't expect the greatest disease resistance, but because they're smaller fruit, we expect them to do better in the heat of the summer. Now, next to them, I have 2 plants called Ceylon, and this was something new that I wanted to try. This is a small fruited plant. I'm growing a lot of small fruited plants this year because I wanted plants that were more productive in our horrible heat, and I just can't grow beefsteaks here in June, July, and August because it's just too hot and humid and all the flowers dry up and die. So as you can see, really great production on these plants so far. Smaller fruit. I don't really know quite what to make of them yet, so we'll see how they go. I'll make a determination if I'll grow them again, probably based on taste and how they handle the heat. Then next to it, I have paste type tomatoes. This is called Pozzano, and lots and lots of tomatoes are forming on the Pozzano. Now I just made a video on blossom end rot, which I will link to above. These are the only tomatoes I've grown in years that have ever gotten blossom end rot, but that's because I don't grow a lot of paste tomatoes, and that is a problem with paste tomatoes. They're very sensitive to that, probably because they're so elongated. So I have a few instances of blossom end rot on both plants. This is also the Pozzano. Now the good thing about them is they're very productive, and blossom end rot usually clears up later in the year because the soil gets really warm and they sort of grow out of it as they get better established. So far really good yields, and we'll see how the flavor is. Now we move on to the beefsteak tomatoes, and we start off with Chef's Choice Purple. This is a hybrid variety that is similar to Cherokee Purple, but it doesn't have the issues with fruit set and disease and production that Cherokee Purple has. I love Cherokee Purple's flavor, but it's just miserable to grow. It has terrible yields. The plants are always the first to succumb to the heat in my garden. Chef's Choice Purple corrects on a lot of those problems, and it has better yields. Now because it is a child, an offspring of Cherokee Purple, it's starting to get disease, and it is hybridized, but there's only so much you can do. So as you can see, I'm starting to get a few problems on this plant, as to be expected with any beefsteak type. Then next to that, I have the Chef's Choice Bicolor. Now what's funny is, last year, this was one of the most productive plants that I had. It was ludicrous production. This year, for whatever reason, I have one tomato on it. I don't understand that, because it was so incredibly productive last year. And it's also starting to get some disease on it. I guess this must be really susceptible to drought. I can't explain what's going on, because we've been in drought since February or March here. So all this work for one tomato, and I even did hand pollinate it. Now it looks like I'll probably get a few tomatoes later up the plant as it gets older, but overall really disappointing production, and I'm sorry to see that. Then right next to that, I have Chef's Choice Red. This is a hybridized version of Brandywine Red. This is loaded up with some nice clusters of fruit, definitely a lot more productive than Brandywine Red. I'm going to start getting blossom drop because it's just getting too hot for tomatoes where I live, but overall looking pretty good. Kind of a stunted plant, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's when you plant any tomato, all seeds are not created equal. So if you plant 10 different seeds of the same variety, sometimes you get a couple that are just runts of the litter, and maybe this one's just a bit of a runt of the litter. Then right next to that, I have Chef's Choice Pink, and Chef's Choice Pink is a dead ringer for Brandywine Sudeth. Probably just as good, except it is a stronger plant. Much less disease issues. Maybe there's a spot here or there because it's getting later in the season for us, but overall really good production. I had a fantastic time with this plant last year, so I had to grow it again. Then right next to that is a variety called Big Brandy, and this was one that I grew last year, and it was super productive. I think one of the problems I'm having this year is that I just didn't spend the time hand pollinating like I did last year. I went on vacation, and I just didn't pollinate the flowers because I was away, and I probably would have gotten better production. We've also it's been hot lately, and it's just causing the flowers to drop. Maybe I'll get some more production up here because there's a lot of flowers, but not quite the greatest production. I got much better production last year. Then right next to this, I have Brandy Boy, which is a Burpee hybrid of Brandywine Sudeth that I've been growing for years, and this one's doing really well. As always, it never lets me down. Nice fruit clusters all over the plant, some really big tomatoes on there. So I think it's going to be a big year for the Brandy Boy. So I'm really happy about that. Now this one right here is a head scratcher for me. This is Brandywine Yellow, and it's the only heirloom beefsteak that I'm growing this year because it is my favorite all-time tomato. Just incredible. And if there is one thing Brandywine Yellow is known for, it is horrible production. And this is the Platfoot strain, by the way, which is known to be a little bit stronger. I usually get terrible yields off of Brandywine Yellow. And this is probably some of the best production that I've gotten off of Brandywine Yellow in all the years I've been growing it. Really nice fruit clusters, and it appears that some of the blooms are still hanging on, so I may even get some more tomatoes up the plant. It looks like that one's holding too. And very similar to this other Brandywine Yellow that I'm growing, I have some nice big tomatoes in there. And believe me when I tell you, if you grow Brandywine Yellow and one plant gives you, 6 to 8 10-ounce tomatoes, you did a really good job, because they are stingy, especially when you live in the humid southeast like I do. And I'm hoping that some of these flowers hold as well, because if I could get Brandywine Yellow into July, that is a big win for me. Then right next to this, I have Arkansas Traveler, which is an heirloom slicer. And the reason why I grow this every year is, despite being an heirloom, this is one of the most disease-resistant, heat-resistant plants I've ever grown. And this always gives absolutely off-the-charts yields. I mean, just look at this. They're starting to turn huge clusters of decent-sized fruits. No disease on this plant yet, which I expect. So not all heirlooms have had the disease resistance bred out of them. Arkansas Traveler, really a winner if you live down in the south and you want to grow an heirloom, but you don't want to deal with disease and you want something that can still set fruit when it starts getting really hot. Now this plant right here is called Indigo Blue Beauty, and I grew this last year, but it kind of died off on me early in the year, so I didn't really get to harvest anything off of it. Something about this plant, it is just not a strong plant. 2 years in a row, kind of weak, but at least I am getting some production this year, because last year I got nothing off of it and it just kind of died on me. So nice clusters of fruit, small fruit, weak plant, kind of cool looking fruit. So I'll decide if I'm going to grow this again based on how it tastes, because you're certainly not going to plant this one for vigor or production, let me tell you. Then over here we have our two monsters. This is Big Beef, probably the most prolific of the big beefsteak hybrids. This thing, it did not disappoint me last year. It's not disappointing me this year. This is so productive that it's just amazing. Why would you even grow anything else? If you don't care for variety and you just want straight production of absolutely perfect looking fruits that never get marred, never split, are super disease resistant, can set in the heat, well, Big Beef is for you. And because it's a hybrid, for whatever reason, it is super early too. I mean, look, this monster is already turning when none of my beefsteaks are turning. Crazy production, amazing production on Big Beef. So super excited about that. Big Beef never lets you down. Now next to Big Beef is a free seed packet I got from tomato growers with my order, and it's called Patty's Striped. And I just grew it because I can't say no to free seed, and it looks like it has really nice clusters of fruit down there. I don't know if it'll actually turn out to be striped or what, but really surprising production. So that's kind of cool. I'm hoping that this does well. It's still blooming on me. It's been really hot. I don't know if the blooms will hold, but I didn't think much of it when I planted it. But it's doing so well and doesn't really have any disease on it yet. So I'm going to give this an honest assessment. Then right next to it, I have Jersey Devil, which is an heirloom, really weird looking tomato. I grew it last year, and it was one of the most terrible producers and most disease-ridden plant I've ever grown in my entire life. But I grew it because I ate the fruits, and they were freakishly good. I mean, easily one of the most delicious tomatoes I've ever tasted. And this year, for whatever reason, it's doing a lot better. Really nice big clusters of fruit. Tomatoes everywhere on this, and it doesn't seem to have the blossom end rot problems that some of the paste types have, although I may have a little issue right there. But it's still producing. I'm still getting fruit clusters, and it's not unlike these paste types to be a little bit more heat resistant than the beefsteak types. And I'm still getting production back there, so really happy about that. I'm hoping I have a better year, but as I would have thought, I'm getting some disease on the plant. It's just a very susceptible plant, so it's a rough one to grow here in the southeast, but boy is it tasty. then interweaved and being taken over by my Jersey Devil plant, which I did a horrible job of managing over my vacation, is something called Berkeley Tie-Dye Heart, which is a cross between, I think, pink Berkeley tie-dye and some kind of ox heart tomato. And this sucker is really loading up. I think I got this from Wild Boar Farms. It just sounded kind of cool. Some new variety that hasn't really been tested very long. Seems to be pretty productive, as I would expect from any kind of ox heart tomato. They're much more resilient than some of the beefsteaks. So we'll see how this one does overall. Then next to it, these two tomatoes, they are called Rebel Starfighter Prime. I bought this for one reason, and one reason only. It had a really cool name. Well, two reasons. It also had a really cool picture, and it was really hard to find and rare. And believe it or not, there are two plants, two, right next to each other, that have just completely grown into each other. And it has really funny looking striped oxheart type fruits. I don't really know what to make of this. I don't know if it's going to be any good, but I thought I would be an early adopter to a very new variety. It was hard to get this seed, and it wasn't cheap, but I really wanted to try it. Really weak, wispy looking plants, but despite how terrible the plants look, they actually don't have much disease on them, maybe just a few spots here and there. And the production seems to be not half bad, and they are flowering continuously up top. So who knows? I have a lot of flowers that are drying up here, so we'll see if they hold and turn into tomatoes. Then right next to it, I have another variety called Lucid Gem. And I think I got these from Wild Boar Farms as well, because I needed to round out an order, and the picture was really cool. Let me tell you, production, production, production. Look at that. So it's nice to see novelty plants that are actually good performers as well. There's very little to maybe no disease on this plant. So anytime you get a lot of times these really cool novelty fruits that are striped or whatever, they don't produce great, or the plants are just pathetically weak. And this variety has incredible production, really unique, beautiful fruit, and seems to be pretty disease resistant, and it's still pumping out flowers. So what you see right here are all of my indeterminate tomatoes, and just overall most things are doing well, except for that Chef's Choice bicolor that absolutely killed it last year, but for whatever reason this year fell flat on its face. Now I'll get into my dwarf tomatoes and my determinates. So let's start with my dwarf tomatoes. These were the tomatoes that I planted on March 1st underneath my my milk jug greenhouses. I'll make sure to link to that video above, because a lot of you thought they may not make it under the greenhouses. Well, they did, and they're doing great. These three right here are all Tasmanian chocolate, and I've actually picked a couple of tomatoes off of these. Unfortunately, when I went away on vacation, I had a massive caterpillar bloom, and I had to throw away probably 30 or 40 tomatoes because they were all infested, and it's been just a battle since, and I finally got it back under control. So these were even more full of fruit, believe it or not, about 2 weeks ago before I left on vacation. But you can see really great production on all of them. Not a fluke. These dwarf tomatoes are, they give great production when the weather is cool. They are, though, very susceptible to disease, and they act like determinants, so they're going to start dying back. You can see that's not disease down there, that's natural dieback. That is disease right there. That looks like early blight. You can see the swirl pattern. So that right there is what blight looks like. Anytime you see a swirl pattern like that, that is disease, not natural die-off. Then right next to this, I have one of my favorite dwarf tomatoes, if not favorite tomatoes of all time, the Dwarf Emerald Giant. They give you enormous green fruits with dense, deep foliage, and these are the most acidic tomatoes I've ever tasted in my entire life. If you have a canker sore in your mouth and you eat one of these, you will be in pain. The foliage is so dense that it's actually hard to see the tomatoes in here, but believe me when I tell you, they are loaded up. And this is a dwarf tomato right there. You wouldn't know because it's close to 5 feet tall, but really a monster plant with fantastic fruit, and I wait all year for this delicious fruit. Now let's get into my dwarf tomato bed. Next year I'm going to build this into a hoop house so I don't have to deal with the pests. This is where most of my bug infestation was, my caterpillar and moth infestation. So these right here are both dwarf emerald giant yet again. One of the strongest and best producing large fruited dwarf tomatoes out there. Really fantastic. Then next to it I have Rosella Purple, which is one of my favorite tomatoes of all time, let alone dwarf tomatoes. I think they beat the pants off of Cherokee Purple in terms of taste. They don't have the green shoulder problems. I think they have richer, sweeter flavor. The one thing is they're very susceptible to heat. So you need to plant these as early as possible for them to set fruit in the cold. Every year they're one of my first plants to come down with disease. Then next to that I have my Adelaide Festival tomato. This one is dying on me. Clearly it's ill, which is a shame because it has a ton of tomatoes on it. Problem with these dwarf tomato project tomatoes are they generally are disease susceptible. So this is going to have to get ripped out once these start turning. But this is a fantastic tasting, beautiful variegated plant. This one right here is dwarf snakebite. Looks like this also has pretty decent production. Seems to be fairly disease resistant for a dwarf tomato. Everything blew over in a windstorm despite being Florida weaved. So there's lots of tomatoes back here. I don't want to disturb them too much because I don't want to break anything off, and they're holding on okay. But you can see it's a very productive variety back there. Right next to that is Fred's tie-dye. This one is beautiful variegated fruits, very acidic. I've been growing it for years. They are huge, much bigger than my hand. So if you want a very productive beefsteak dwarf tomato, this is really a winner if you ask me. In my opinion, it's one of the best ones. Then over here I have a variety called Rosella Crimson. It's getting really beaten up by disease, but it does have some decent tomato production on it. There's some down there, there's some up here. The foliage is so dense that it's really hard to catch them all, but not too bad in there, also not super impressive either. So I'd put this somewhere near the bottom in terms of production and disease resistance. It's a really nice pink tomato though. I did pick one earlier and a pretty good flavor. So if you don't live in a really hot, oppressive, and disease-ridden environment, this might be one for you to look into. And the final stop on the tomato tour is my hoop house that I've covered with insect netting. And because it's covered, this hasn't gotten the attention that most of my tomato garden has gotten. But because they're determinate varieties, they require little to no maintenance, so that's okay. And this insect netting has been a revelation. It's been so easy managing these tomatoes because the netting just keeps all the insects off. So these hadn't gotten hit by the caterpillars like my other tomato beds had been. And I'm growing 3 different varieties in here. There is Margherita, there is Bella Rosa, and there is Marglobe. And Margherita is a plum type tomato, like a San Marzano or a Roma type, and the production is just off the charts. You can see them all in here. See, the problem with these hoop houses is while it's great for showing, while it's great for growing tomatoes, it's terrible for showing them. So you're just going to have to trust me when I tell you that I have these Florida weaved in here, and there's so much fruit that everything just collapsed. So it's hard to get in here with this insect netting on. So I'm going to have to find a better way to manage this next year. Luckily, determinate tomatoes produce more quickly, so I'll be able to eventually clear this out. Then over here I have Marglobe, which is an heirloom determinate variety. And the fruit set, they're not big tomatoes, but I think that's just because the fruit set is so heavy that they're just kind of collapsing on themselves. And they're already starting to turn. Determinates tend to be early. So lots of Marglobes there. Everywhere you see round tomatoes, they are Marglobe. So that's probably the best example I can give you right here. Most of these are Margaritas because I wanted to put my plums under here to get more into sauce making. But on the corner here we have the Bella Rosa. Bella Rosa is just a monster tomato. Incredible production, super disease resistant, huge beefsteaks. They still have a ways to go in terms of size, but as you can see, doing really well, loaded up with fruits, starting to pull down. There's so much fruit it's pulling down the string that I have everything Florida weaved on. Coming in from the other side, you can see these are all the Margherita varieties. Super, super productive. Easily one of the most productive varieties that I'm growing. Already turning colors all over the place. That big one down there that's fallen over, that's another Bella Rosa. The fruit is so big that the plant is collapsing in on itself. That's kind of the issue that I'm having with these Bella Rosas. They're so big and they're so productive that they're just falling over. Thankfully, disease doesn't matter so much with determinate tomatoes because the natural life cycle of the fruit is usually shorter than that of the disease. So they can kind of lay on the ground, and since there's insect netting over it, the insects won't get them. So it's a mess in there. It is a jungle, but let me tell you, it is a fruitful jungle. And the last tomato variety in my garden is a determinate variety called Siletz. And Siletz is a fantastic early tomato that was bred in Oregon that loves cool temps. Now normally, Siletz is the earliest tomato that I plant in my garden, but we had an absolutely terrible spring this year where it was way too cold and I planted all my tomatoes later than I ever have before since I moved to North Carolina by several weeks. And I think that's why I'm just not having the production that I've had in previous years. Everything just went in too late because of the really cold spring that we had. And as a result, these Siletz are the most disease susceptible, most heat susceptible tomatoes that I grow. They do beautifully when I plant them in late February and carry them in and out as the temperatures allow. This year they didn't go out until April and they just look pitiful. It got way too warm, way too fast because they were planted a month late. I had a big experiment plan where I was going to test all different types of fertilizers using these plants, but nothing went according to plan, and I'm going to have to hope for a better year next year and hope for more moderate temperatures and an earlier spring where I can actually run the experiment. And that right there concludes the tour of every single tomato variety in my garden. Is this the worst production year I've had since I moved into my house 4 years ago? Yes, I am not having great production this year, and it's woefully inadequate compared to previous years, but I think that's just because we had such a late spring. Everything went in weeks too late, nothing grew because it took a while to warm up, and then once it finally started to warm up, the temperatures just skyrocketed, and now it's too hot, and I'm losing a lot of my blooms. So it's been a rough year in terms of temperature, and for that reason, I'm not having the greatest production that I've ever had by a long shot. However, that's not necessarily a downer because these are the types of years where we learn what really sinks or swims and what really does well in your climate. And this is how we can weed out the stragglers that may do pretty well when everything's going perfectly, but when you have a lousy year where the temperatures just don't align, you know what's going to be your fail-safe varieties so you can fall back on them every single year and have a strong core foundation of plants in your tomato garden every year. And make sure to stay tuned to my channel. Make sure the notifications are turned on because once my black cherry tomatoes start ripening, I'm going to do a tomato face-off with all of my cherry tomatoes, and we're going to find out what the best cherry tomato varieties are. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you found it helpful, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you're notified when we release more videos like these. If you have any questions about the varieties I have growing in my garden, please ask them in the comments down below and I will try to answer them as best as I can. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in my garden in real life for real, I have them all linked down below on my Amazon storefront, in the Amazon storefront link in the video description. So check that out if you want to see the products that I use in real life. And while you're there, check out my Spreadshop link for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Oh boy.
Good boy, Dale.
This is ridiculous.
Okay. All right, ready?
This is
sit.
ridiculous.
Sit. Mia, sit.
Dale,
Sit.
you look great.
Oh, good girl. Sit.
You look great.
Ready?
Oh, it's a dog day afternoon.
Oh, good girl.